Hello Year 11 and welcome to your first GCSE Religious Studies revision video for Paper 1 Christian Practices. My name is Miss Smith and I'm one of the Religious Studies consultants for the Federation, and I've created this video to help support you prepare for your exam. In order to do this, I'll be using the revision checklist that you have available to you. You can find this checklist on Padlet or in Student Essentials, or you can ask your religious teacher for one. This video is going to focus on the first two topics in the Christian practices section, prayer and worship. So on your checklist, you will see that you need to know different forms of worship and their significance: liturgical, non-liturgical, informal, including the use of the Bible, and private worship. For prayer, you need to know prayer and its significance, including the Lord's Prayer, set prayer, and informal prayer. So what we've also done is we've created some columns for you to tick off whether you're confident that you know two ways of doing something, a quote for this thing, and the importance of doing it. And the reason for this is because if you are able to do that, you are prepared for any 1, 4 or 6 mark question on the exam paper. Plus you'll be giving yourself some great foundational knowledge to help approach a 12 mark question. So all of our revision is going to be structured around that to help you prepare for the different styles of questions on the exam paper. So let's start with the definition of worship. Worship is any act that shows devotion or love for God. Now what we need to know is that there are two ways Christians worship, in case it comes up as a 1 or 4 marker. Two good ones are shown here on the screen. So we can separate it into liturgical worship as the first way and non-liturgical worship as the second way. So liturgical worship follows a set pattern of prayers and readings. Non-liturgical worship is spontaneous, informal acts of worship, for example, speaking in tongues. So for a 6 mark question, you will need to explain why things are important or why Christians do these things. So why is worship important for Christians, or why do Christians worship? You can use the same information for both these styles of 6 markers. So what I've got here is it helps Christians feel closer to God, it shows gratitude to God for what he has done, and it links to his natures. So you are praising him because he is all powerful or all loving. All right. In a 6 mark question and also in your 12 mark question, you need to be able to give a quote. And remember, you need to reference the Bible when you're quoting in your 6 markers. So the quote we've got here is, "Let everything which has breath praise the Lord." So praise is another word for worship. So you can use that quote as long as you say it's from the Bible. So let's move on to prayer. So the definition of prayer is communicating with God. And we need to know 2 different ways Christians do this. So we've got set prayer and informal prayer. So set prayer is formal written prayers often memorized and used in liturgical worship. And informal prayer is spontaneous personal prayers spoken in one's own words, often used in non-liturgical worship, which can be public or private. So Christians pray, or prayer is important to Christians because it helps Christians feel closer to God, it shows gratitude for what God has done, and it also links to his natures. To you pray to him because he's loving, because he's all powerful. So you can begin to see that there's crossovers with prayer and worship, so you can use similar information. In terms of a quote for your 6 and 12 markers, you can use the Lord's Prayer as it's in the Bible. All right, you don't need to know it off by heart, just the fact that this is the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples how to pray. But if you have prayed this prayer in your life and you do know it, or you have learnt it, you can use any line from it as a quote too. Actually, a really good piece of revision could be to write out the Lord's Prayer and annotate it with as many links to the GCSE syllabus as you can. Okay, so let's focus on some 4 mark question examples now, so that you can see what it might look like if this topic comes up in the exam. So on the screen here, I've got some possible 4 mark questions. In the practices section of the paper, they will always ask you to explain similar or different ways that Christians do something. So explain 2 similar or different ways Christians worship, practice liturgical worship, practice private worship, pray, or practice set prayer. In your answer, you're always going to have to do a simple explanation and then develop it, and then a second simple explanation and develop that to get your 4 marks. I'm going to model one for you, but it's a really good idea that you have a go at some of the others as well. So if you set yourself a 4-minute timer and have a go at completing these in timed conditions, you can then take your answers to your teacher and they will mark them for you. So let's have a look at a model answer. So you can see here that I've got a simple explanation, I've developed it, I've got a second simple explanation, and then I've developed it. So for the question, explain 2 different ways in which Christians pray. I've got one way Christians pray is through set prayers, which means formal prayers that are written down and recited. So that word which is underlined is a connective, which means this is a simple explanation, not just a stating of a fact. I've then developed it by giving an example of a set prayer, which is the Lord's Prayer. I've then got a second point, which is a different way that Christians pray, because this is about informal prayer. So a different way Christians pray is through informal prayer, which is spontaneous personal prayers that are spoken in one's own words. So I've explained what informal prayer is for my simple explanation. I've then developed it by linking this to liturgical worship. So these are often used in liturgical worship publicly or privately. So when you're developing your point, you can use a who, a what, a where, a when, a why, a how, an example, doesn't matter. Notice that I haven't answered in full sentences, but you can still get full marks, and that's a really good time-saving tip for the exam. Let's have a look at a similar 4 marker. So explain 2 similar ways in which Christians worship. So one way Christians worship is through liturgical worship, which follows a set pattern. An example of this might be singing hymns from a hymn book. A similar way Christians worship is through non-liturgical worship, which is spontaneous and informal. This is similar in that it's still worshipping God and involves singing, but the words will be made up rather than read from a book. So the first sentence is a simple explanation of a way that Christians worship through liturgical worship, which I've highlighted in yellow. You need to explain what this means to get the mark. So I've underlined the connective to show it's a simple explanation for your first mark. Then I've developed this point with an example. The second point is a similar way that Christians worship, because it's still about worshipping God, but it's through non-liturgical worship. It still follows the same structure, simple explanation then development, but it's about non-liturgical worship. And remember, your answers don't have to be in full sentences. In terms of 6-mark questions, these form a similar structure to your 4-mark questions. So simple explanation, development, simple explanation, development, except to get your crucial 5th mark, one of your developments needs to be a quote with the source. And for your 6th mark, you then need to apply the quote. So you link the quote to the question. On the slide, there are some potential questions which you could use to practice, but we're going to go through one so you can see what it might look like. So explain 2 reasons why the Lord's Prayer is important to Christians. Refer to sacred writing or another source of Christian belief and teaching in your answer. So here's the model answer to this question. It is important because it is the prayer Jesus taught his disciples to pray, which means it is a model prayer. In the Bible, the disciples asked Jesus how to pray, and Jesus gave the Lord's Prayer as the answer to this question. This shows the importance of the Lord's Prayer as it makes Christians pray like Jesus. It is also important because it is used as a basis for prayer today, as it states all the important elements for what a prayer can include. For example, it starts by worshipping God. So you've got a simple explanation, the development is the quote, and then I've got the source of the quote, so we make sure we get that mark. and then I have applied the quote using the phrase "this shows," which I've highlighted in pink. Okay, so that first paragraph is going to get 4 marks. Simple explanation, development. The development is a quote with the source, so you get the extra mark, and then you've applied the quote. And then I've got another simple explanation, and then I've got an example as my development. So that would get 6 out of 6. And remember, you've got to say where the quote comes from to get your source mark. If you forget to say it's from the Bible, you will lose a mark. So it's really important to remember this. Okay, so I really hope that gives you a little bit of grounding into Christian prayer and worship, as well as how to answer 4 to 6 mark questions. Take some time now to set a timer and have a go at some of those other 4 and 6 mark questions. Take your answers into school for your teacher to mark, and good luck with your revision.